This is Mark L. White with another health hacks, and here we have Dr. Brian Stenzler. Did I say your name right?
You
Stenzler?
did, yes.
Wow, it's I look down at your name and I'm like, oh God, did I garble that up? But it's really cool because you're talking to us about how to raise not any kids, but how do you raise healthy, happy, and well-adjusted kids. And this is something I have 3 kids. I'm still asking myself that now. So I want to learn from you. My kids are teenager. Well, my son is 20, my daughter's 17, my other daughter's 13. Am I too late? Like or is there stuff you can give me now?
Oh my gosh, you said your oldest is 13?
No, my oldest is 20.
Oh, 20. So
Right?
you're definitely not too old for the 20-year-old, but this will even be more beneficial for the 2 younger ones. But everything, with your relationship with your 20-year-old is going to transcend, for as long as you're on this planet, and so the 2 of you can have relationships that that are going to be determined by how you act and how you communicate with each other. So maybe not in how you feed him, that may not pertain as much, but all the other keys to a wellness lifestyle are pertinent to anybody at any age.
So they're all athletes, like all of them, and they didn't get it from me. They got it from their mom. My son played competitive club soccer at the highest levels. My youngest daughter she's on rhythmic gymnastics team, USA team, junior team, and they're one of the best rhythmic gymnast teams, which is a funny sport, by the way. It's, like a group of people dancing with hula hoops and whatnot, but she's very competitive. And my oldest daughter plays soccer, she plays basketball, she plays every sport, she plays very well.
Mm.
So, but I didn't plan to raise them for physical, but they got into that. What would you say to parents whose kids sit at home and play video games all day?
Well, there's a lot to be said about, as they're growing up, if they're going to grow up on computers all the time and on technology, there are obviously some good benefits in terms of the mind, depending on what games they're doing and how they're interfacing with the equipment. But they could just become, the brains could become mush. And, if they're not social, if they're not active, they're not moving their bodies, obesity. There's so many different, there are negative, so many different negative effects to just spending so much time on video games. And, I do see that there are video games that are getting better and better. There's the virtual reality stuff where people are running and jumping. And, I've got a 6-year-old son, and every now and then he wants to put on one of those like Halloween chase or Easter chase things where they're running and they're ducking and they're getting activity. So there are ways of getting activity through video games, but they've got to get outside, unless you live in Antarctica, you've got to get outside, you got to get your vitamin D, you got to interact with people. Even if a child or an adult is not as social of a being, they still need to get in front of other people. So you want to have a good mix. There are some people that I know that raise their kids to be totally physical and they don't do anything for the mind at all. They don't know how to use a computer or anything like that. So there are pros and cons. And I believe, that when it comes to that, there's got to be balance. And, that's why I titled my book, The 5 Keys to Raising Kids for a Lifetime of Physical and Mental Health. There's both. And you don't want to have trade-offs. You want to have them both be, well in balance with each other. So, there's, you talk about when we were growing up, there were the jocks, right? And then you had the brainiacs, and very few were both. There were some. And those are the people that excelled at pretty much everything. So I think it's good to, as you're raising your kids, to encourage them a little bit of everything. You don't have to encourage them to do the video games because they're going to want to do that naturally. But, there's a time and a place for it.
I want to get into those 5 keys. I think everybody can benefit from it. But before we do, how did you get into this? Are you what's your background? And, what was it that made you want to really focus and make this your passion?
So, when I was growing up as a kid, I was always kind of that strange outlier that was healthy. I'd been working out since I was 16. Now I was the littlest guy, I'm still small, compared to everyone else. I'm barely 5'4". And, I was kind of the skinny, scrawny little kid. And when I was like 15, almost 16, I started working out in the gym. I was inspired by the likes of like Arnold Schwarzenegger, before Arnold Schwarzenegger was Arnold Schwarzenegger, I think he'd done like 2 movies at that point. And I was just really inspired. I'd be at the gym, I'd be reading the stuff. And all of a sudden I started to develop muscles and I'm like, whoa, this is interesting. And so as I started to, go through my late teens and starting in college, like those people didn't realize that I was this little skinny, scrawny kid, that had the confidence of the skinny, scrawny kid. They thought I was athletic. I wasn't as coordinated, but I at least looked athletic. And that helped build my confidence. And so fitness was always a big part of my life. And healthcare, I was that guy that was like eating salads for dinner before salads were on a menu. So I'd go to a restaurant and ask like, for a large salad, they're like, we don't have large salad. I'd be like, well, can you get me like 2 or 3 small salads and we'll put them together. We'll throw some chicken on it. Now it's on a menu everywhere you go. So I always ate healthy food. I never really was into alcohol. I never did drugs. It was one of those things where I lived a wellness lifestyle, though I didn't really know much about it. And when I was in college, I originally thought I was going to be a movie producer. That's what I wanted to go to college for. I was growing up in New York, wanted to go to USC, UCLA, and go out and be a movie producer. And that was what the dream was. And for various reasons, we won't have time in this podcast. Won't get into that. But then I was introduced to more in healthcare, and I was going to become a physical therapist. And so I changed all my classes from theater and film to pre-med, which was interesting because when I was growing up, like in high school, I did not do very well in biology or any of those sciences. So that was interesting. And then my mom started dating this guy named Nat, who was a retired police officer for NYPD, New York Police Department. And he asked me if I'd ever thought about being a chiropractor. And I couldn't even say the word chiropractor. I didn't know what it was. I did wrestle in high school. I know that some people on my team went to this chiro something or another. I couldn't even say the word. And he said, you ever think about being a chiropractor? I'm like, I don't know anything about that. What do you know? And he's like, well, I don't know either. He goes, but my son Steve just started at chiropractic school and I've never seen him so happy and so, on focus and on purpose with stuff. It's like, you should talk to my son Steve. So I did. I started to talk to Steve and just fell in love with the concept of what chiropractic was about because it fit in with my lifestyle. It was about, you're treating your body as a temple and, not using drugs and surgery all the time, to maintain health, but to do things that would create health. And so I had made that decision to become a chiropractor pretty shortly after meeting Steve, especially with this particular circumstance. So Nat, Steve's father, and my mom were set to be married. And so a day and a half before the wedding, I'm going home from college to go to the wedding. And a day and a half before the wedding, Nat suddenly drops dead.
Oh my God.
And he was 43, which is younger than I am now. And he didn't have any symptoms prior to dying. His first symptom of heart disease was an aneurysm. And so he thought he was healthy when he woke up that morning. But obviously, healthy people don't just suddenly drop dead any more than healthy people suddenly get a terminal diagnosis of cancer, for example. And it's not, you don't always have to have symptoms, but you can't be perfectly healthy and have your body just stop working. And I realized that I needed to dedicate my life towards something that was greater than what other people had been doing. And so when Steve introduced me to chiropractic, and Steve, even the week that his father had passed away, took me around to all these chiropractic offices that really introduced me to the profession. And that was ultimately when I became a chiropractor. But I wasn't going to focus just on the spine, though the most important thing that a chiropractor does is the nervous system, right? Making sure the nervous system is functioning at its highest level, because every organ, every muscle, every gland, every tissue, every cell in the body knows exactly what to do, when to do it, and how to do it because the brain tells it so. But I also knew that there was something that was not going to allow the brain to communicate with the body perfectly, and that was going to cause those misalignments that chiropractors fixed. And that's when I said, I got to dedicate my life towards helping people's nervous system function better and to keep it aligned. And that's where I just started coming up with these ideas of, the dream wellness and, making sure that other kids didn't lose their dads at 43. And so kids did not grow up with the same problems that their moms and dads have currently. So that's, I had a pediatric and family wellness practice for 23 years, practiced in New York and San Diego. And now I'm have a new transition in my career to really reach a larger scope of people with this wellness lifestyle.
I think awareness when it comes to kids' health is something that is amazing. And one thing I've noticed through raising kids and just also growing up in the 70s and 80s, we grew up eating McDonald's. We grew up eating horrible food. And I think you see much more awareness now on the food we put in our kids' body for the most part, even though you do see some obese kids and it's sad. But I think what I've noticed just raising my kids is with social media in the mental aspects that go along with social media and having these devices, once your brain's always on 24 hours. So I see that you've dedicated a large portion of what you're doing, not just to physical health, but to the mental health of kids. What would you say to a parent? Like, you have a 6-year-old, I assume they don't have a phone yet, but they're soon going to be, within a couple of years, they're going to be asking you for a phone because their friends are all going to have phones. And then they're going to be comparing themselves at 9 or 10 and thinking everybody lives that perfect Insta lifestyle. And you see teen depression at its highest rate it's ever been. You've seen, I hear about kids that have committed suicide at a higher rate than ever before. How are you addressing that, and what would you recommend to a parent?
Yeah, so definitely, it's a really good question. I've actually been interviewed on some national news programs not too long ago talking about this because it is a very real issue. I mean, the suicide rates are higher than they've been, for adolescents, and the isolation and being away from the friends, not being in school, all of that, from the pandemic, compounds it and everything. And I think that what it comes down to is creating a household where people are communicating and people are enjoying each other's company. Wellness starts with the parents. There are people that have read my book and they're like, wow, I don't even have kids, but this book was so helpful. I'm like, yeah, I niched it into parents, but if you're not living a wellness lifestyle yourself, your kids are not going to do it. So kids play follow the leader. So when it comes to the mental health, we've got to be very mindful of the words that we use at home. I always talk about affirmations. It doesn't have to be like the old Saturday Night Live skit with Stuart Smalley, like, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like me, right? Although affirmations like that are very powerful. But, my wife and I have done affirmations with my son since he's born, even before he was born. We always say how great he is, how wonderful he is, all the great attributes of his life. Before he goes to bed, we ask him, what is he grateful for? What did he learn today? Who did he help today? So those are very important. We'll talk about goals. We set up little goals and working on purpose and just being happy. So there's a lot of strategies that you can do both as parents and kids. But the truth of the matter is, if the parents are not working on their mental health, then the kids are not going to be set up for success. So it starts with the parents and how they communicate. And, look, I mean, you go back to like biblical days, even in Proverbs, they say death and life is in the power of the tongue. What you speak about, you bring about. And so if you say, if someone's yelling at their kid and being like, you're a bad kid, why did you do that? Or you're shy, or this, and you're labeling people, they become that. But if you communicate differently and say, you're a good kid, you did a bad thing, we're going to handle that now. It changes things because the kids need to know, A, that they're loved and that they belong in the family and that they're awesome and that they're perfect and they can do no wrong, but they could do wrong things, right? Because they are wonderful people. And making sure that they have good friendships too. Like Jim Rohn, he says, he's famous for saying, you're the average of the 5 people you spend most of your time with. That's the same for kids. Depending on the age of the kids, if they're hanging out with kids in gangs, if they're hanging out with kids that start trouble, kids that lie, all these different things, that gets onto your kids as well. So there's a lot that goes into the mental wellness of a child's lifestyle. I'm a firm believer in prayer, affirmations, meditation, yoga, all those things you can do with kids as well as adults.
Now, having parent, like my wife is from Colombia. It's a different Colombia, not, she's Latin. Our parenting style is very different, but I know it's also important that parents, whatever your style is, that parents are on the same page when it comes to raising kids, what's permissible, what boundaries to set with kids. And sometimes I find a challenge is to make sure me and my wife are on the same page, because if they're not, the kids will exploit that. What would you say to maybe a single parent or parents that come from different lifestyles or have different philosophies on raising child? What strategy would you recommend there?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Mark, because this is something that my wife and I talk about all the time. We're not always on the same page, and we work on getting on the same page. But you know what? We have different upbringings in how my dad and mom raised me, and how her parents raised her. Uh, and so sometimes we have to talk afterwards. And I don't have it all figured out when it comes to raising a child discipline wise and stuff. And my wife and I did this great course by Amy McCready. It's a parenting course, which was awesome. That really helped us get on the same page much more than we were earlier. But the one thing is that we have similar values and similar goals. So we know that there are certain things that are not going to happen. We're not going to hit him. We're not going to lie to him. We're not going to do certain things. And I try to raise my voice less. I come from a yelling family. I'm from New York originally. We yell. That's what we do. Talk with our hands and yell. But I'm yelling less and less. And that, Amy McCready, that helped a lot. Communication is very important. So you've got to communicate with your spouse and get on the same page. Everybody has different drivers and motivators. It's also helpful to me that my wife is a relationship consultant. So, she basically takes people through an analysis of what drives and motivates you, how you learn and download information, how you perceive life, how much energy you have, your tolerance towards people, places, and things. So we do this stuff together, so we understand each other. So if one of us is parenting differently, we don't get upset with the other one. We know we kind of just ride with it. We go with it while our son is there, and then we talk about it afterwards. So it's very rare that two people, especially from two totally different cultures, like in your situation, that you're going to parent the same way. But the love you have for your children and the values that you have in your family transcends all of that. The styles come after.
And I agree with that. I think ultimately my wife and I both want what's best for our child. We both give all of our children a lot of love. I'll tell you one of the things challenging, and I'm sure you have this in New York, we're in Miami, which these are open cultures, and the values you have in your household and what you're seeing now, like my daughter came to us the other day and said, okay, the school is talking about transsexual rights. They have a drag show, which in my opinion is too much. And with kids and using proper pronouns and all this stuff that you're seeing in the culture. And I get the generation stuff, but I think it's hard being a parent that came from a different generation to get used to raising kids in which the cultures are different. And especially in a culture like Miami, which is a very materialistic culture, and you see craziness. They're introduced to drugs at a younger age, and I'm sure you have that in New York. Like, how do you keep your kids protected knowing that the culture around them doesn't fit your value system? This episode is brought to you by Gainswave. If you're a guy who is not achieving optimal performance in the bedroom, and you've tried the pills and you've tried the shots, and you're looking for an all-natural way to boost blood flow in the penis, Gainswave is evidence-based and proven. Go to gainswave.com and find a provider near you.
That's a really big and could be a charged question, because right now we live in Florida. So we're in the Sarasota, Florida area. Like I said, I was raised in New York, lived in California for 15 years, and now I'm in Florida, which I think is a really good place for me. And the Florida bills and everything are very misunderstood, whether they're purposely misunderstood and purposely misled. Look, I always thought about, what is it that we do today that will be looked at in 40 or 50 years from now, or 100 years from now, like, wow, those people were bigots, they were racist, they were this, they were that, because like back in the slavery days, you didn't think of it, right? I don't know how, but they didn't think of it, right? And so you look at Thomas Jefferson, you look at our earliest, the founding fathers of our country. I'm not going to say whether they were right or wrong. I'm not going to get into that political debate, but it wasn't necessarily on the consciousness for some reason. What are we doing today that will later be labeled as something like that? And maybe this trans thing is going to be part of it, but our generation is not accustomed to it, especially if you don't have somebody in your family that's like that. And I think that the political parties are going overboard on both sides, where the people in the middle, which is the majority of America, have to take sides, which is ridiculous, and so it just puts the kids in a very confused position. So this is why it's more important than ever to really communicate with your child about what you want them to know. And if you believe in, if you're a faithful person, church, synagogue, mosque, whatever it is, wherever you want to get them, spiritual nurturing is so important, because just like we eat organic food, non-GMO stuff at our house, like 95% of what we have. We don't do corn syrup. Just like my son knows that candy that his friends are eating is not good and usually passes it up, but not always. I'm learning. He tells me a little bit here and there. I think the same thing with the values at home, that he knows what we believe and that we love everyone, but we're not going to teach certain things right now to him until he's old enough to comprehend it.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I think we can all agree that Thomas Jefferson, that him owning slaves was wrong. That's, everyone agrees with that. We can all agree racism is wrong. And I agree with you that we always need to be open-minded. My middle child, she doesn't eat meat. She's a vegetarian. It does cause a little bit of stress in my household because the rest of us like to eat meat, but she may be looking back at us 50 years later saying, you guys were out of the norm. So I try to be as open-minded and as supportive as possible. I think my wife is trying to be more open-minded, considering she does come from a different culture. So my secret sauce when it comes to raising children is I try to get them to share, and I try not to be judgmental. And that's like, I try not to judge. I try not to label. It's not easy. And they do come to me. They come to me with the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I say, look, we can talk about, if you're ever, like I say to my oldest daughter, she's 17, if you're ever at a party and you're in trouble, call me. I won't ask questions. I won't say anything. And it works. She calls, we have that trust. And I think it's important to build that trust. I want to get into the 5 keys to raise kids because everybody wants to know that. And so we're going to save the best for last, and we can go through them one by one. But what are the 5 keys? What would you tell every parent they need to do?
So DREAM is the acronym for the 5 keys. So it's easy to remember. D is for diet. And diet, the way I define it, is everything that goes into the body from the outside world to the inside world. So it's everything you eat, drink, taste, touch, smell, feel, hear. All the movies you watch and all the people you spend time with is just as much part of the diet as the food you consume. So, I could write 100 pages on, nutrition, but also I've got to write about gossip. If you're spending time with naysayers, negative people, if you're watching, bad TV, bad movies, reading magazines that are not very constructive, that's all part of your diet. And if you remember the old computer term GIGO, garbage in, garbage out. If we put garbage into our bodies, whether it's through our mouth or our eyes or our ears, we're going to get garbage out. So we have to be very mindful of our diets. And then R is for relaxation. That's giving your body a chance to call time out, to reset, repair, regenerate, and rejuvenate yourself. It's a state of refreshing tranquility where you really get a chance to sharpen your axe and move forward. Then E is for exercise. That's any activity that requires physical or mental exertion. So not just going to the gym or going for a nice walk, but also doing like crossword puzzles, reading stimulating books and magazines that keep your mind sharp. Technology could be a part of that as well, as long as it's being done safely and not for too long a period of time. We'll skip A for a moment. M is for mental wellness. That's connecting your inner purpose and passion to your outer goals and tasks in all phases of life, being right with self-esteem, self-worth, self-values, and so on and so forth. It's the process of creating a life where when you wake up in the morning, instead of being like, oh God, it's morning, like, oh God, it's morning. Like you're ready to go, you're excited because you're practicing a lifestyle with mental wellness. And that's where I differentiate mental health from mental wellness. Mental health is the current state that you're in. Mental wellness is the lifestyle that that has an impact on your mental health, whether you have a good positive mental health or not good mental health. When you have a strong DREM, you should stay in adjustment, which is being in balance mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally, and having an optimal brain-body communication to the nervous system. And so we live our lives on our nervous system, like I said earlier. Every organ, every muscle, every gland, every tissue, every cell in the body knows exactly what to do, when to do it, and how to do it because the brain tells it so. So we need to have that optimal communication between the brain and the body, making sure that we're functioning at the highest level possible. What causes somebody to go out of adjustment is the inability to adapt to a stressor. Physical stressor, chemical stressor, and mental stressor. So physical stressors are obvious. That could be a car accident, could be a fall, exercising improperly, being on your phone like this all the time, or talking like this, poor posture. All those are physical stressors. Then you have emotional stressors. That could be finances, relationships, tests, teachers, family, money, whatever it is. And then you have your chemical stressors. That could be foods that you might eat that you might be allergic to or might be bad for you. Maybe it's got pesticides in it, genetically modified, pollution that we breathe in, drugs that we take, whether they're pushed or prescribed. It could be a life-saving drug, but it's still a chemical stressor regardless. And you got to, release the toxins out of your body. So when you don't adapt to chemical, physical, and emotional stressors, you go out of adjustment. So the dream lifestyle, those 5 keys, help keep you in adjustment. So this way you can live to your best potential through a fully functioning nervous system.
First of all, I think it's an amazing framework, and I agree. Everything you mentioned, that just me being a parent, I agree with. I didn't hear anything you say that I'm saying, wait a second, tell me more. I will say this, I have 3 kids. They're not cookie cutter kids. They have, one's way out here on the political spectrum, the other one's on the other side of the political spectrum, which is interesting. Some are, one's an extrovert, one's an introvert. They're all so different. Like all kids, we're all unique. How do you take unique kids and adjust it for a single framework? Will this work for all children, or is this a general framework? And then do you have exercises in the book that talk about what you do with kids who, for example, have problems with mental wellness or have problems with their diet? Like what would you say to that?
Yeah, so the book, it is a general framework for everyone. And within that framework, there is something for everybody in there. So for mental wellness, I think I have probably like 30 different things that we've got to look at in mental wellness. 5 of them might be for one of your kids, 10 of them might be for another kid, and you just work with each one individually. I mean, it's not unique to have a family of 3. I come from a family of 5. There were 4 boys and a girl, and we are all very different. I'm probably the most different in many ways. I definitely think very differently than my family does. I'm the only one that moved away from New York. And so if my dad, and my mom were looking at, how would we raise Brian differently than his brothers and sister, like, how does that work? Because what worked for them would not work for me. And so it's not unique. It's very rare that there's more than one child in a family where they're all similar. And so it's understanding each child's perfection and helping them live that perfection based on their natural talents and what motivates them in life. And it's one of those things where we really have to have a lot of patience and understanding and appreciation for it. When people ask me, what is my purpose in life? And I recommend everyone has a purpose statement. My purpose is to serve God by assisting all people realize their perfection. And so every single person is perfect. We are born perfect. I believe we're created in God's image, so he doesn't make mistakes. There's nobody born with too few drugs and too many organs, right? We're all made perfectly, and we just need to recognize that perfection and really work on, people always talk about, work on people's weaknesses. There's a time and a place to work on the weaknesses, but there's also a time and a place to work on strengths, because that's where people are really going to grow.
So we could get into the book, but I think I want people to actually read the book. I know on your website you have where parents could actually take a dream score. Well, what does the dream score tell a parent how well they're doing now and how the book's going to help?
Yeah. So a lot of people, first of all, everyone asks me, and I've done a bunch of podcast interviews and other news interviews, and they're always like, what is the one thing that we need to do? What are the three things? And everyone's coming from a different starting point. So I could say the one thing, and they already do that. So the Dream Score helps people get through my, 350-page book in under an hour, where basically you take this 20-minute lifestyle assessment survey, and it basically will tell you exactly where in the book you need to read if you don't have the time or the desire to read the entire book from cover to cover. So you get a score, and it shows you whether your battery is depleting or charging. And it'll basically let you know if, tells you where you're, as a parent, where you currently are in your wellness walk, and it'll serve as a predictor of your child's current and future health. So it takes about 20, 25 minutes to do it. But then when you have that information, you can get through the content of the book, the stuff that you need the most first, so you can make major changes immediately.
So for anybody listening to this, the first step is find your dream score. If it resonates with you, buy the book. The website that they go to, and we're going to have in the show notes below, people will find this, but it's dreamwellnessbook.com. I think it's fascinating. What do you have next? Is this your first book that you've written?
It's my first book. And after I finished it, because it took me over 12 years to do it, I always said it was my last book. But I think there might have to be some more books in me, maybe delving a little bit more deeply into certain topics. I've done a lot of stuff with CEOs. So there might be a book there for CEOs at some point. That's probably in the works. So maybe I get a big CEO or something to co-write the book with me. But yeah, and
like fun.
Yeah, and I'm also starting a platform that'll be out months down the road called wellknowledge.com, where we're going to have it curated with all different lifestyle online courses that people can take that are all evergreen and on demand. Awesome. All for reasonable prices. So there's a lot of great stuff coming. And, I do a blog every week, wellnesswikis.com. So people can really get a hold of some of the information that we have out there and really start, living a life and living the dream every day.
I agree with you about everybody finding their purpose. I think every parent should educate themselves as much as possible. I think the framework makes sense. I'm going to take the test when I get off this podcast. I appreciate your time. I think what you're doing is amazing. I think when you're ready to write a book on CEOs, I can share with you all the craziness I've had to put up with, because I don't think people understand some of the stuff that we have to deal with. And I think that will have a great market too. So I wish you the best of luck there. Congratulations.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure being here. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Take care.